been noticed. Kawanablo, NCDC, Capital City, Nakempla District, Morobe. Mi pa sinam lo distawi now, I'm 3 weeks now. Big pa pagarap to mi pa kisim na sinam. Na mi pa askim lo support now.
3 weeks after the 9-mile eviction, victims plead for government assistance. Chronicles of HP, October 11th, 2024. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, PNG. 3 weeks have passed since the brutal eviction at the 9-mile Morobe Block in Port Moresby, leaving the victims in anguish and despair. The eviction resulted in the loss of 2 lives, severe injuries to several others, and the destruction of homes and property. Now homeless and suffering from the trauma of that day, the victims are calling on the government for immediate assistance and justice. The incident, which occurred on September 20th, 2024, was marked by violence, confusion, and tragedy. What was intended as a routine operation to remove settlers from land reportedly slated for development quickly escalated into chaos. The police, tasked with enforcing the eviction, were met with resistance from some of the residents, who claimed they had been living there for decades and were unaware of the imminent action. The tragic events that unfolded left the community devastated, with many families now living in makeshift shelters and struggling to find food, water, and basic necessities. Despite the scale of their suffering, they say their cries for help have largely been ignored. The eviction, a day of destruction and loss. The 9-mile area, located just outside of Port Moresby, has been home to hundreds of families for years. Many of the residents claim that they had settled there legally, some having purchased plots of land through informal transactions that are common in urban settlements. However, the land in question was reportedly marked for commercial development, and the authorities, armed with an eviction order, arrived on September 20th to clear the area. Eyewitnesses recall the day as one of utter chaos. Early that morning, dozens of police officers, accompanied by heavy machinery, descended on the settlement. Some families had just woken up, while others were preparing to leave for work or school. Within hours, homes were demolished, and personal belongings were scattered across the area. "We didn't even have time to gather our things," said Martha Kanimbo, a mother of 4 who lost her home in the eviction. "We were told to leave immediately, and then they started tearing everything down. My children are still traumatized by the sounds of the machines and the sight of our home being destroyed." The resistance from some of the residents led to a violent confrontation with police. According to reports, several people were injured during the melee, and tragically, 2 men lost their lives. The names of the deceased have been withheld from public release, but they were said to be long-term residents of the settlement. One died from gunshot wounds, while the other succumbed to injuries sustained in a stampede as families fled the violence. As the situation spiraled out of control, the authorities halted the eviction, but the damage had already been done. Most of the houses in the settlement were reduced to rubble, and residents were left to fend for themselves in the open. The aftermath, struggling to survive. In the 3 weeks since the eviction, the situation for the displaced families has only worsened. With no access to shelter or basic services, many are living in makeshift tents made from salvaged materials. Others have sought refuge with relatives in nearby settlements, overcrowding homes that were already struggling to accommodate large families. "I have 4 children, and we're living under a plastic sheet now," said John McGanney, another resident who lost his home. "At night, it's cold, and during the day, it's too hot. There's no food, no water, and the children are getting sick. We have nowhere to go, and no one is helping us." Residents have reported an increase in illness, especially among children and the elderly, as they are exposed to the elements without proper sanitation. Diarrhea, respiratory infections, and skin diseases are becoming increasingly common in the makeshift camps, where there is little to no access to health care. Local leaders have been vocal in their criticism of the government's handling of the situation, accusing authorities of failing to provide adequate notice or alternative housing for the affected families. "We are human beings, not animals," said Peter Liba, a spokesperson for the evicted residents. The government must take responsibility for what happened here. We've lost our homes, our belongings, and our loved ones. All we are asking for is basic assistance to survive, a call for government intervention. Despite the scale of the tragedy, many of the victims feel abandoned by the government. They claim that since the eviction, there has been little effort to provide relief or compensation to the affected families. Appeals to local authorities and provincial officials have so far gone unanswered, leaving the displaced residents in a state of limbo. We've been to the provincial office several times, but no one is listening to us, said Mary Whala, a grandmother whose home was destroyed. All we want is some help to rebuild our lives. We can't live like this forever. The victims are now calling on the national government to intervene, demanding emergency relief, including food, water, medical supplies, and temporary housing. They are also seeking a full investigation into the events that led to the deaths of 2 men, as well as accountability for those responsible for the violence. Civil society groups and human rights organizations have joined the call for action, urging the government to provide immediate assistance to the displaced families and to address the broader issues of land tenure and informal settlements in Port Moresby. Pauline Kyrie, the director of a local non-governmental organization that advocates for the rights of urban settlers, said that the situation at 9 Mile is a symptom of a larger crisis. Port Moresby is growing rapidly, and many people have no choice but to settle in informal areas because they can't afford proper housing, she said. The government needs to address this issue in a humane and responsible way. Mass evictions without proper planning or support for the affected families will only lead to more suffering. Moving forward, hope amidst despair. Despite the immense challenges they face, the residents of 9 Mile Morobe Block have vowed to continue fighting for justice. Community leaders are organizing meetings and drafting petitions to present to the government, hoping that their pleas will be heard before more lives are lost. We're not giving up, said Peter Liba. This is our home, and we will fight to rebuild it. But we need the government to step up and do its part. We need help now, not later. As the country looks on, the fate of the 9 Mile victims remains uncertain. For the displaced families, the scars of that tragic day will take years to heal, but their resilience and determination are a testament to their strength in the face of overwhelming adversity. The government's response, or lack thereof, will determine whether this tragedy becomes a turning point for the country's most vulnerable or yet another chapter in the long history of land disputes and human suffering in Papua New Guinea.